Hello everyone, my name is Brenda and this is Seminar 9 about Postmemory. Our group is Brenda Lopes, Gabriela Araújo, and Maria Clara Brito. This paper is called Memory, Postmemory, and Critical Language Teacher Education by Andrea Matos and Erika Amancio. The paper shows us the influences of historical events on the identity of English teachers in Brazil through narratives and stories of their experiences. Discussing the connections between life experiences and language teacher education (LTE), exploring the possibility of using narratives of experiences to educate language teachers in Brazil. But what is experience and identity? Mikuli 2010 studies experience from a variety of perspectives from ancient and modern philosophy to cognitive sciences in order to reach her own conception of experience related to teaching and learning languages. For the author, experience is a process that, when narrated, can be relived and expanded, bringing transformations both to the meaning of the experience itself and to those who have lived it. Coratini 2007 understands identity as formed by inner discourses which are, in fact, fragments of multiple discourses that constitute the discursive memory of the human being, received as an inheritance and continually modified and transformed precisely in our relations with the other, including at the same time our values, beliefs, ideologies, and cultures. The authors affirmed that the concept of identity is never simplistic, once it involves both common social-cultural and particularly subjective elements. The postmodern conception about the identities of language teachers brings new proposals for teaching for social justice and allows us to visualize a more promising future for the role of education in the world today. According to Matos 2014, education, including what is now being called critical education in foreign language, certainly has a role in promoting more critical perspectives that can lead to the reduction of injustices. To achieve this, however, we need English teachers to be prepared for such a reality. In the author's opinions, understanding the possible meanings and influences of the concepts of identity and post-memory may contribute to this goal. Now we are going to talk about the narratives.
Hi, my name is Maria Clara, and I'll be talking about narratives in language teaching and teacher education. So, according to Brunner, narratives they have been described as stories, myths, dramas, and historical accounts that emphasize human intention and action, and which are composed of a unique sequence of events, mental states, happenings involving human beings as characters or actors. And according to some studies of psychology, we humans, we have two modes of thought. So we basically think in a paradigmatic way and in a narrative way. So for us, narratives, they are as natural as language. So since we were born, we tell stories, we listen to stories, and we tell narratives. So we can conclude that we humans, we developed the culture of organizing and communicating experiences with narratives. And narratives, they can shape our experiences and they can create selves. Brunner says that we constantly construct and reconstruct ourselves uh, because of the situations we find, because of the things we experience in life. And we do that being guided by our memories of the past and by the hopes and fears and desires we have for the future. So, as we use and we use narratives in life based on our experiences, we also do that, and it's also common in our professional life, in our case as teachers. So we also construct and reconstruct ourselves all the time as teachers. In 2009, Matos conducted a narrative study with pre-service teachers, and the results they refer to teachers' previous experiences as English learners, meaning that the way we learn a language, in our case English, it directly impacts our experience as teachers. Barcelo says that narratives are an excellent method to capture the sense of human experience and human learning and change. And that narrative, they also show the unique ways that each person deals with their dilemmas and challenges. She defines experience as the human mode of being in the world. And when it comes to being teachers, our experiences, they are totally and directly um, defined and associated with our future desires and our decisions. So everything we live, everything we experience, everything counts for what we desire for the future and for all the decisions that we make in the classroom. Blake and Haynes, they defend the use of narratives as a mean of understanding the teaching process. So, concerning narratives in the teacher activity, we have some scope related to the teacher practice per se, but also some relevant information on students' views, needs, and specificities. Kalaja, Menezes, and Barcelos, they describe narrative as a tool that allows an understanding of the impact of our experiences, the emergence of deeply hidden assumptions, and an opportunity to understand change in people and events. So if we take that as an example to our students um, or as teachers, um, we have this opportunity to understand people by learning and understanding, listening to their experiences, and also to the events, to classes, to the environment we're in. Paiva said that learning narratives reveal that stories they do not repeat. So even though when we listen to similar stories that we live in the present, we're not going to repeat the same things, the same series of events, because each person, each author of a story is an author, is a different person. We are unique. So stories, they have different factors, they have different people acting in it, living it. So they do not repeat. And it refers to the complexity of language learning process, uh, because if we consider that each person, each student, and each teacher has their own story, their own factors, even though they may be similar, they are different. So, as Matos pointed out in a study in 2009, the classroom, when we perceive a language classroom, we can see it as a complex system of factors because we're dealing with people, with humans. So we can conclude that narrative studies, they allow us to understand our own practice as teachers and also to understand the environment we are dealing with. We can also identify intersections within the field with narrative studies. And by analyzing and talking to other teachers, other practitioners, we can address issues not previously accounted. And by that, we're able to construct knowledge together with other teachers and other practitioners. Paiva in 2006 discussed how participants, they tend to compare with each other, we tend to compare our studying experiences with our experiences as teachers. And it means that the way we learn, if we have a positive or a negative experience, this experience is likely to have a great impact on the way we teach, and it might influence our beliefs in classroom, our identities, the way we behave, our attitudes with the students. And having said that, it is important that we analyze the contributions that narratives have for language teaching education, but more specifically for critical language teaching education. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriela, and for this part of the presentation, I'm going to be talk about memory, post-memory, and possibilities for critical language teacher education. Okay, so let's start talking about the term post-memory. So the term was used by Marianne Hirsch during the 90s, and she defines this term as something to describe the relationship of the second generation with powerful, often traumatic experiences that preceded their births, but were nevertheless transmitted to them so deeply as to seem to constitute memories in their own right. Okay, so the term post-memory may also be called inherited memory, a belated memory, prosthetic memory, received memory, okay? So Hirsch says that in certain extreme circumstances, this memory of other generations can be transmitted to those who were not actually there, not actually in the event that happened, right? Also, post-memory characterizes the experience, right? Like I said, of those who grew up dominated by narratives that preceded their birth, whose unrelated stories are evacuated by the stories of the previous generation, shaped by traumatic events that can be neither understood nor recreated. Okay, very good. So, also we have Jorge Ribeiro saying that post-memory is a way to resort to memory as a form of confrontation and problematization of the political and historical path. And that's when we start talking about the relation between post-memories and the possibilities for critical language teacher education, okay? Because when we relate to these post-memories in our classrooms, we have the opportunity to create problematizations about events, past events, and how these narratives are being passed through our generations, right? So we have in this text the term classrooms as communities of memory. So these communities of memory would be the locations, which are the classrooms, in which such obligations can be worked out, okay? So some obligations that were passed through generations or some events that are perpetuated and we don't even question it, the classrooms are the location that we can discuss it and we can work this out, okay? So that's what communities of memory means. So Marion Hirsch first used the term post-memory in an article on Art Spiegelman's Mouse in the early 1990s. So Mouse is a comic book that talks about a story that exemplifies very well what the concept post-memory means. So let's see, Mouse, the comic book, talks about the familial relationship between Art Spiegelman and his father, which is an Auschwitz survivor. So the story recall that familial post-memory is the sharing of memories across generations, specifically from sharing of memories between first-generation survivor to their children. So this book, it encompasses two different narratives, that of the father and his son's reactions to his experience with the Holocaust. So the son is talking about the story of the father, but he is also reacting to it. So the story is very sad and melancholic, and we see that the son is very affected by his father being a survivor of Auschwitz, that himself, even though he was not there, he still feels this in his skin. So the story contains a series of conversations between the father and son, which illustrates how familial post-memory passes through the father's memory to his son post-memory. So this excerpt was taken by the website class Race Gender, which talks a little bit more of post-memory and this comic book, which is very interesting to really understand this concept. So coming back at the concept of classroom as being communities of memory, we have a great example of this on the text, which according to Matos, many of Brazilians that have become teachers and have passed on to their students their conformist culture and practice. So in this way, the new generation of Brazilians who were pupils at school has therefore reproduced the social practice of previous generation, right? So those who have lived in a military domination, for example, after the 64 coup, the author goes on and claims that the current generation of school-age young people and children often meet in their family and community context with members of the previous generation that still reproduce the conformist culture. So therefore, we have lack of opportunities to develop less conformist practice, to question these practices, right? Because the teachers are not going against these conformist cultures and practices, okay? So how can we be against these practices, okay? So an approach based on the perspective of critical language education and critical language teacher education may create possibilities for the development of these activities, right? So the development of activities that brings these post memories, but at the same time, one aims to develop practices that question these memories, question these practices, are in very much close relation to critical language education and critical language teacher education. So by means of greater understanding of the concept of post-memory, how post-memory may influence the shape, the identities and attitudes of language teachers in the Brazilian context. Also, education as a critical practice provides means for disconnecting common sense learning from the narrowly ideological impact of mass media, right? So the regressive tendencies associated with, for example, hypermasculinity, the rituals of everyday violence, the inability to identify with others, as well as from the perceived ideologies of state repression and its illusions of empire, okay? So as language teachers and as language teachers who want to include, which is necessary to include the critical language education and practice, it's very important to understand the concept of post-memory in order to understand what are the practices that are being passed on through the generations and how can we create activities to question these practices, right? And to understand them in order to go against them, okay? All right. At the end of the text, the author goes on to say a very impactful sentence, which is remembering is an act of recovery and reassessment, which presupposes the possibility of critical interlocution with the past. Okay, so we have, we remember, right, these memories in order to not forget. So as individuals and as a society, right? So this is the end of this part of the text. I hope you liked the presentation and I'll see you on the discussion forum. Thank you.